Hi, I'm June Wall. I'm an education consultant in e-learning and libraries, and I'm just going to take you through a very quick overview of how you can go about designing an online program for students. There are three reasons why we might put an online learning program together for students. Usually it's because we're going to be asking for understanding, but there's also a reason why you might like to just create a program or an online learning activity to raise awareness, or on the other side of it, to actually build quite in-depth competency skills. In this instance, for this program, we're going to be concentrating on developing understanding for students. As you become more experienced in designing and online learning, you'll find that this type of checklist will be something that you'll have beside you all the time. Ultimately, though, you need to remember to have a very specific objective, to have quite explicit instructions, and that starts with, from your point of view, designing and developing an in-depth outline, making sure that your learning units are short and sweet. So when I'm talking about that, I'm really talking about thinking about the age range of the children that you or the students you're designing this for, and thinking about what their length of time is that they're able to actually concentrate and focus on material, and how much time they may need as well to actually do the activities themselves. So when we're talking about something where there's not technically a person in front of children, you really need to make sure there are shorter units of work or shorter activities. You need to also look at how you introduce the unit, how you allow the students to move through the activity, and how you conclude it. Ensure that you've had assessment items, whether they be quizzes or other types of more in-depth material. Build in relevant feedback. So in some particular mechanisms, you will have the ability to have automated feedback mechanisms. In other times, you'll find that it'll have to be asynchronous material that you'll provide as you go through the unit itself. And then ultimately, you always need to, once you've designed it, look back on it and think, does the sequence of activities that I'm taking the students through, does it allow them to achieve the end goal? Really think very carefully, because teaching in a face-to-face environment is quite different for students than actually working in an online environment, because you're not there to remind them what they have to do. So it has to be quite explicit, quite short in the respect of the types of activities, and in making sure that it's always aimed towards that end goal. In the case of the sample that we're going to be looking at today, it's looking at the Australia as a Nation unit of work that's part of the Australian curriculum, and I'm looking at this for stage 3, so that's years 5 and 6. In an age range, we're talking about 11 to 12-year-old children. So the Australia as a Nation unit actually really asks for quite in-depth historical skills. It actually also gives a whole range of material from an inquiry learning point of view. So that's the focus we're going to take. In order to get to this particular point in the planning, you would have had to have actually created quite an in-depth outline, be very specific about what you want the students to learn throughout the unit. And so consequently, I'm indicating through the rest of this webinar at the top of the screen to show you how much time it takes to get to each point or each benchmark aspect within the planning, the implementation, and the delivery of it. At this stage, it's actually been quite in depth to make sure that my planning has been involved, that I have allowed for every aspect that I possibly can. So you need to really think about that. So you get to the point where you've got your specific objectives. Now, there are objectives that you would obviously have from a curriculum outcomes point of view, but in this instance, if you're putting material into an online environment, there's got to be a value add to it. So I'm suggesting here you need to think about what are additional specific objectives that give value to the students and also value to the teacher. So some of them may be, as I've indicated here on the screen, the ability to differentiate down to an individual level, the ability to focus very much on an individual level at the research skills, making video skills, teaching others skills. From the student's point of view, it gives them an understanding of the breadth of the content, that you can actually cover a lot more if you so choose to. It actually also gives them the ability to actually start developing their own self-discipline. And obviously, it really focuses in, especially the particular unit we're looking at, on individual inquiry. So on the basis of that, what are the assessment items or the assessment tasks that would need to be completed? To give some realism to this, I'm going to be looking at this in relation to the context of the class, being 28 children, the usual range of abilities, not a one-to-one device school, but has shared devices, both laptops and iPads. And we're also making the assumption here that there's no language difficulties, no non-English speaking backgrounds, no significant learning support needs either. What you're seeing now is the developed outline of my planning to get to this point about Australia as a nation. So I've looked at the whole curriculum unit. I've looked at what would be the norm for how it would be taught in the school, but also how I can add value to it, how I can either give breadth or depth of information or knowledge for the students, and how I can differentiate it. So from that point of view, I've looked at it that there would be the ability to divide the class into 4 groups, that all 3 of the groups at any one time would be in online mode because of the number of devices and computers that were available, but one group would be in a face-to-face mode. So you can see the face-to-face mode is for the democracy over time. The online modes are for government, migrants and immigration, and Federation and British heritage. And the questions that I've allowed there are the high-level or essential questions, the inquiry questions that I want the students to be able to work their way through. The major assessment, therefore, has been for the students to actually put together a video of what are the major contributions of significant individuals or groups to the development of Australian society. In my planning, I have then gone further to decide on what particular skill, given that I have focused on the skills that I want to really bring to the fore in this unit of work, in this online learning, what are the skills that I really am going to focus on, and therefore what are the digital tools that I can be including within the package. Now, as indicated, this is a closer look at the whole plan. The original unit of work is one that is over 20 weeks, so it's over 2 terms of a school year. And I have broken it down into what would be expected both from an online and a face-to-face mode as we move through. So in the first part of the unit, in other words, term 1, weeks 2 to 5, well, I should say weeks 1 to 5, it would be very much the establishment of what are the scaffolds that we're going to be using, what are the expectations of behaviour, how do the groups work through that. So all of those soft skills that are really important to actually focus on at the beginning before you get into the depth and the breadth of the online itself. From there, you can then move into the rotation of the group, and I'm always bringing group sharing, the collaboration tools that are needed, the teaching methodologies that I want the students to do, because I want the students to actually support each other by teaching each other. And then finally, into the last part of term 2, working through the conversations, having conversations with students to then develop their final projects, and in their final week to present those projects. Given the planning, therefore, up until this point, you then need to move away and locate or create the resources that you'll need. On an average, I'd say you can probably locate at least 70% of anything that you're going to put into an online learning. The difficulty, especially in the younger years, is actually ensuring that they're at the right literacy level for the students and the right conceptual level. So there may be some reasoning that you'd have to create your own resources. I'm also suggesting that you look at the types of digital tools you would like to include within the unit of work and have a core set that you make sure you allow the students to learn how to use them as part of the group work, part of the online learning. In this instance, I'm looking at research tools that are appropriate for the students. I'm looking at collaboration tools and presentations tools. Once you have selected your tools, you've got all your planning together, then you need to look at and think about what is the online environment that you're going to develop this work into. You may be in a school that has a learning management system, therefore that's what you're going to put it into. Or you may be in a school that doesn't have a particular LMS or a learning management system that it uses, and you have the ability to select. And this is where you need to select based on what are the needs of the students, the age range of the students, what types of tools that you want to actually incorporate within it, how is the work of the students going to be stored or managed. So in this instance here, what you have here is an example of a OneNote example for a senior science class, and that is to show you that it can be used on a mobile device, on a tablet, or on a computer. And my selection in this instance was based on the fact that the students didn't have consistent types of devices. They would be on different devices all the time. So whatever online environment I selected had to be one that allowed for mobile, tablet, and desktop computing access. Another example of a tool or a learning environment that can incorporate all those different types of devices is Schoology. So I'd suggest that you have a look at this when you have a chance. So the online learning environment has been created and there has been decided upon, and therefore you need to create the structure. Notice that I'm using this terminology of S cubed, in other words, short, sharp and shiny. So you need to make sure that you have your specific learning activities in such a way that they are something the students can pick up quite easily. As I develop, especially in a OneNote environment, I always keep a working space myself, but you can see across the tabs at the top of the page here that I have divided that into those 4 group areas, so that there's that Australia's a Changing Society, Federation, Government and Migrants and Immigration again. And for each of those tabs, the whole information environment, working environment and quizzes, etc., they'd be within that. But what you're seeing at the moment is my working environment where I dump material to make sure that I don't forget where it is. This is the part where sometimes we forget, because when we're teaching in a face-to-face mode, we actually use the narrative unconsciously, because that's who we are as educators. We create the narrative for the students. We talk about their learning intentions. We talk about what the success criteria are going to be for them. We talk about how they're going to work through it, how it may relate to them in their everyday life or what they're doing on the weekend, etc. And we do that naturally. In an online environment, you have to create that narrative, but you need to make sure that it's designed that way. So you need to be thinking about how are you going to create the narrative? How are your explanations, your instructions going to be worked through? It's usually a good idea to incorporate a mix of reading, voice and video. Once you've created the narrative, then of course it's up to the most important part of the whole activity is the thinking activities. So it's not just about setting them to read or to listen to a podcast or watch a video. It's what do you want the students to do as a result of taking on some knowledge or some input? And that's the core part of your activities here now. Is it going to be a quiz? Is it going to be a collaborative group environment? What type of thinking activity you're going to build in? Of course, that will be dependent upon the learning environment you've selected. Just putting together a series of information, some quizzes, doesn't make a good online learning activity. What makes it much better is when you build in collaboration and discussion. You may have an environment that you can incorporate discussion boards, you can incorporate messaging. If you use something like Schoology, there's collaboration areas within that. You need to think about how you build in collaboration itself, where it fits in the zones of learning activities themselves. And of course, ultimately, it's then a matter of what is that final assessment task that you decided upon at the very beginning of this? How is it going to be worked within that online learning? Is it going to be a group activity, an individual activity? But whatever it is, it needs to bring everything together that they've learnt and actually show their learning. Notice too here that I've put in, this is the time when we talk about, if you like, a design thinking process to this, which is a continual iteration model. Go back to what I termed step 4, check that. If it doesn't work, have a look at what you need to fix. Get someone else to look at the whole program for you. Then go on to the next steps, and you will continually go through iterations until it improves. And it absolutely never ends, if you like, because once you've created something, you're going to continually improve that. So just to conclude here, really what you're needing to be thinking about when you're designing online learning is that you make sure that it's an active learning process, not a passive one. So you don't want students just reading, doing something and nothing else. You want them to be thinking, talking, doing, creating physical objects, especially if we're talking about the age level we are at 11 and 12-year-old. If it was for an older class, so a high school class, then that may be less that way. But also think about how much activity the students need. Ultimately, active learning is at the core of any online learning activity. Thanks. I hope this has been of some help for you.